This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bill. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
Hi, I'm Dana Stevens, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, the strange lionization of Luigi Mangione edition. It's Wednesday, December 11th, 2024, and on this week's show, we will be discussing Nightbitch, a new movie directed by Marielle Heller and starring Amy Adams about a stay-at-home mom who may or may not be turning into a were-dog. Black Doves, a Netflix series starring Keira Knightly, Ben Whishaw, and Sarah Lancashire as posh English spies. And finally, the online response to the fatal shooting last week of a healthcare CEO on the streets of Manhattan. Why and how and on which platforms has social media contrived to turn the suspected killer, who was just arrested earlier this week after a 6-day-long manhunt, into a kind of 20th century Robin Hood? I am joined today to discuss these matters by Stephen Metcalf. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hey, Dana, I'm hanging in there.
And joining us from Los Angeles, where she's a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism, is Julia Turner. Hey, Julia.
Hello, hello.
All right, well, let's jump in. Nightbitch is the fourth feature film directed by Marielle Heller, who also made Diary of a Teenage Girl, Can You Ever Forgive Me, and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Heller is also an actor who appeared memorably in a story arc in the show The Queen's Gambit, if you watch that. Her new movie, Nightbitch, is adapted from a best-selling novel with the same excellent title by Rachel Yonder. Nightbitch stars Amy Adams as the frustrated stay-at-home mother of a toddler. She's never named in the screenplay, except as Mom. Feeling frustrated, bored, and exhausted by her new role as a nonstop caregiver, while her husband, who's played by Scoot McNairy, is always scooting off on business trips, Amy Adams' character gradually begins to go feral. Strange things start to happen to her body, including the sprouting of fur along her spine and the beginnings of what appear to be a tail. And why are packs of neighborhood dogs showing up at her door at night and following her around in public parks? Is it possible that Mom is turning into a dog? Let's listen to a clip from Nightbitch. Here, you'll first hear the voice of Amy Adams, mainly, and briefly at the end of the actress Arshana Ravan, who plays one of the fellow mothers in the main character's Mommy and Me music class, and who's now expecting another child.
Do you ever feel like the big secret is that we are gods? What? We fucking create life. We make life. We are so powerful. I bet men are terrified of us. I mean, look at you. You are this miraculous goddess growing bones as we speak.
I am pretty powerful.
All right, Julia, I'm going to start off with you on this one because I believe it was you who wanted to take on this movie this week. And it occurred to me also watching it that you're the closest of all three of us to that early childhood era of parental life when it somehow seems perfectly plausible and sometimes desirable to transform into a monster instead of doing your daily tasks. What did you think of Nightbitch? And would you send fellow parents going through that time to see this movie?
I really admire this movie. I love Marielle Heller's work. We've discussed it before on the show, and it's amazing to see the experience of birth and early motherhood represented in this way, and in a way that's both straightforward and strange. You know, some of the movie is sort of an elegant but sort of prosaic depiction of how draining and repetitive the job of managing early childhood kids can be. And then there's these bizarre magical realist touches which don't bloom into a whole swath of the movie. They sort of remain this kind of filigree around the edges, which is something that a number of critics didn't like or seem to yearn for more, which I want to come back around to with these guys. But it is true that birth is one of the craziest things that humankind goes through. And it's rarely discussed or encountered. And it is also true, or at least it was true in my experience, that the experience of birth reminds you that you're just a different kind of animal on this planet. So the themes of the movie were resonant for me. The performance is great. The subjects are interesting. I love the director. I didn't feel like this movie totally achieved liftoff, and I don't know why. And I avidly read like 10 reviews of it afterwards, hoping that some brilliant critic out there would have put their finger on that feeling I had. And a lot of them seemed to also feel that it hadn't achieved liftoff, but they didn't articulate why. So I guess I come to you looking for help. So many ingredients are here for me to have loved this movie, and instead I only liked it. And I definitely would send people to it just because the subject is novel and the central performance by Amy Adams is fabulous. But I'm dying to know what you guys thought.
I have so much to say as well. And I similarly, Julia, went in thinking, Marielle Heller, Amy Adams, a movie called Nightbitch. Like, this is going to be awesome. How could it not be awesome? The basic setup is all there. But so somehow to me, there was no movie there. And Steve, before I go into my own rant, I want to give you a chance to respond. Nightbitch, yes or no?
Oh, I have the same problem as Julia. It's neither yes nor no, or a lot of yeses and a lot of no's. And I don't yet know how they balance out. So, I mean, my first note to myself in preparation for the show was, what a confusing movie. Let me begin by saying that I had picked up a word of mouth that said that this was a kind of a, however noble and a noble failure, and that nobody was going to go. And I just had the aura of something like I invited a friend of mine to go with me, and the curt response I got back was no thanks. And I was surprised to find that the movie house I saw it in Brooklyn was, I don't know what it was, a quarter full, a third full, that there was a avid audience that was responsive, especially to the first third to half of the movie, as I was. Adams is, that part of the movie is tight, very funny. It's, got this in sort of incisiveness and trenchancy about what those early days of parenthood and motherhood must be like. I can't speak other than as a third person observer of it, but nonetheless, I was pretty hands-on caregiver of my very small children, and that it is that sort of purgatorial, repetitious, the perspective of your entire world ratcheted down. And she says at one point, it's like she's on a permanent suicide watch. And I always thought that, like, you turn away potentially for 5 minutes and you are risking the life of this creature that got brought into the world under your, auspices, to put it coldly. But anyway, I thought the movie was tight. It's very funny. Like, everyone in the theater, me included, was very alive to these tiny little expressions of rage that occasionally get vocalized in a sort of fantasy sequence where she allows herself, the Amy Adams character, Mom, allows herself to just say the volcanic things that are brewing inside her. But of course, we cut back to reality and she hasn't said them. So this is a person who's enormously buttoned up, like self-suppressing, in order to play the part of a mother. And the way Adams portrays that is just, it's almost sublime in how tiny her gestures are and how largely they resonate with the viewer and how weirdly comical, darkly and weirdly comical they are. That part of it is kind of great. And I think Adams is just terrific in this movie throughout. But as it progresses, it turns into almost two completely simultaneous but different movies. One is, it continues to be, it becomes a less well observed social satire on the state of motherhood, given the still incredibly inequitable division of marital labor, right? So a lot of the movie is just about not only her mystification at suddenly being reduced to a biological and maternal creature after having been a very promising artist, which is an important part of the movie, but also just her rage at her husband, right? Who's oblivious in ways that I have to say, I did find cut very close to the bone, they were well observed and well depicted. I say that as a confession. Like, the nature of his obliviousness was all too familiar to me. I mean, statements that are offered in innocence and generosity that he offers up are complete bludgeons to the self-esteem of his partner. They're just obtuse in the extreme. And then the second movie is this body horror movie that there's sort of nocturnal woo that is going on that is invested with an enormous amount of symbolism. And of course, the leitmotif of her converting into a dog at night is, I mean, it drives the title of the movie, the quote unquote concept behind the movie. I never quite understood how these two things went together, because as the movie progresses, Dana, it becomes extremely essayistic. It almost feels as though Heller had kept a diary, which is one of the reasons why the movie is so seemingly true to experience and her experience. And parts of the movie seem to be reading from a diary of the first 2, 3, 4 years of motherhood in ways that lose their satiric fineness, alongside this kind of funny body horror movie that this leitmotif of the canine transformation. And at a certain point, those became unintegrated for me, and that is where the movie kind of lost its thread. It was this odd combination of to my mind, sort of hyper literal description of a marital breakdown in the face of early childhood versus this exceedingly fanciful, as Julia says, magical realist leitmotif. And these two things, once they didn't go together, it was unclear then where the movie was going. But Dana, I'm dying to know, can you enlighten me and Julia?
Yeah, hearing you two on it is helping me sort out my feelings. I actually watched it with my partner who liked it much, much better than I did, who really laughed a lot. I mean, I was laughing some too. And I think the high point of this movie really is Adam's performance and the truly feral comedy of it. She really gets across that feeling of craving raw meat and kind of, sort of losing her inhibitions one by one, and plays that for kind of maximal humor, if not maximal horror. But to me, I just couldn't agree with him that the movie as a whole made sense, because as I said earlier, it just didn't feel like a movie. There was almost a bait and switch element to it. And I read in one of the profiles, one of the pieces we read about Marielle Heller, I think it was the New Yorker profile by Emily Nussbaum, that she doesn't like horror movies, that she kind of shies away from horror in her own life. And you can almost feel this movie doing that. The bait and switch element is that it sets up with these body horror elements I mentioned, like the sprouting of a tail and fur and, these kind of fugue states that the character goes into, where she doesn't quite realize what's happened and she appears to have been running with the neighborhood dogs at night. That is a horror movie direction to go in, right? And if the movie isn't going to go in that direction, it shouldn't plant all of those promises in the first, half an hour or so that it is. If it's going to be this much more abstract meditation, and I think a lot of that voiceover, Steve, that you were mentioning as diaristic actually comes straight from the novel, then it should lean into that side, the side of exploring ideas and abstractions and parables. So yeah, it never balances the body horror side with the kind of psychological insight about marriage and motherhood side. And the side that it abandons, frankly, is the body horror side. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of suspense in the story, except whether this marriage will continue. When in fact, if you were both transforming into a dog and your marriage was falling apart, you would be at least equally concerned about both, if not more concerned about the dog transformation.
Well, right. And then that makes the dog stuff feel very dreamy and elusive and non-literal. And there are these seeds planted about the relationship of the other women in the suburbs to their own internal feral dogness, and this sense that, are these kind of moms in the mommy group also secretly dogs, and there's a mysterious, potent librarian who gives and then denies giving some book about female transformation. There are a bunch of weird portents in the plot that then just kind of they just sort of evaporate and you don't understand what happens to them. But it's helping me figure out, I think you've nailed it, Steve, that it doesn't quite do anything with the premise that it sets up, except for use it as ambiance. And it sort of works to use it as ambiance, but it leaves you feeling unfulfilled because you were expecting something different or more. It makes me wish that you could take this movie and the substance and put them in a blender, because the substance would have been so much better if it had any sensible, realistic ideas in its head as this movie does. And then this movie might be better if it had a little bit more of the courage of its body horror convictions to do the verboten and suggest that movies be other than they are. But it, also thinking about it and thinking about what movies get made, I'm still so glad I saw it and that it exists. Like, even though it's not a full-throated masterpiece of the kind that I think Marielle Heller is capable of, what an interesting movie, what a smart movie, what a smart assignment, like how crazy that so few movies are about this moment of kind of alienation, postpartum alienation. So I really would send people to it because it's just so weird and interesting, even if it's not entirely successful.
Yeah, I would send people as well. And also to see Amy Adams do something that she doesn't often do, which is be not cute, not glamorous, not, sexy or sweet, and just turn herself into someone totally different.
I agree. Let me just quickly say, I do think there is a brilliant idea behind the movie, and it gets at it brilliantly through a lot of the film, but not quite coherently through the whole thing, which is just, it sets up this contrast between the ferociousness, the ferocious weirdness of maternity and being a mother, and the utter banality of being a mom, and the moms are actually really well depicted. And the Amy Adams character just does not want to get absorbed into momhood. And the wonderful thing the movie does is, after satirizing the mom group, it humanizes them in these highly specific and kind of wonderful ways.
Before we wrap on Nightbitch, I want to note something that it does well that a lot of movies about this time of life don't do well, which is that the relationship between the children, or the two children, the twins that play the little boy who's her son, and the actor Amy Adams is incredibly realistic. And we kept commenting on this as I was watching it. We kept saying, how did they get the children to feel so natural? They're really acting as if there's no camera on them and interacting with their parents in this playful way. I say they, but it's one little boy who's played by twins. The twins are named Arlie Snowden and Emmett Snowden. And the New Yorker profile also talks a little bit about Marielle Heller as a mom on set. She's the mother of a toddler and an older child, and spent a lot of time on set playing with the kids that were playing this little tiny boy. I mean, he's, I think, 3 years old. But anyway, there was just a very natural interaction between him and Amy Adams, who apparently on set, the kids called Movie Mama, which is very sweet. And given that there are so many movies and shows where the children are just props that are, used to be in danger when a killer wants to kill them and then quietly go away and play with toys, it was great to sort of see an actual parent-toddler interaction shown so realistically on film. All right, well, the movie is Nightbitch. It's playing in theaters now. Will no doubt be coming to streaming at some point. And I think we all agree, imperfect, but fascinating and tricksy enough to make it worth a watch.
After a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. But with ZBiotics, there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Also, ZBiotics is continuing to invent probiotics that will help with everyday challenges of modern living. Go to zbiotics.com/culture to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use culture at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/culture and use the code CULTURE at checkout for 15% off.
Since 1981, Justin has been producing world-class Bordeaux-style wines from Paso Robles on California's Central Coast. As the pioneer of Paso, Justin wines are what put Paso Robles on the winemaking map. With a rich history of accolades, Justin produces exceptional wines and is proud to be America's #1 luxury Cabernet. Justin Wine was nice enough to send me a couple of sample bottles earlier this year, and they were both delicious. My favorite was called Isosceles. Justin didn't quiz me about my wine preferences or anything, but somehow they nailed exactly the way I like a red wine to taste, which I guess is Bordeaux style, I now know. Anyway, Isosceles was a really nice wine, and I would happily drink it again. Enjoy exceptional wine all season long with Justin. Whether it's for seasonal celebrations, festive dinner parties, or gift exchanges, Justin Wine is sure to make your holidays memorable. Pick up Justin Wine today at a store near you, or visit justinwine.com and enter Gabfest20 for 20% off your order. Justin offers the perfect holiday gifts for clients, colleagues, friends, or family. Be sure to check them out at justinwine.com to receive 20% off your order for a limited time. It's Christmas time in London, as you will soon figure out from the omnipresent caroling on the soundtrack, and all seems to be merry and bright in the world of Helen Webb, the wife of the British Defence Minister. She's the mother of elementary school-aged twins. She's living in a gorgeous London townhouse. She's as casually put together as a model in a perfume commercial, and she generally seems to have won the lottery of life. But the edges of Helen's tightly woven existence are starting to unravel. As we learn in the first episode of Black Doves, a new 6-episode spy series on Netflix, Helen has actually been living under a false identity for the entirety of her marriage. In reality, she's a spy working for the organization named in the title, a freelance espionage outfit that gathers secrets to sell to the highest bidder. As the show begins, Helen's lover, a civil servant, has just been murdered for unknown reasons, a crime possibly connected to the recent mysterious death of the Chinese ambassador to England. At the same time, Helen's old friend Sam, played by Ben Whishaw, who's a trigger man for the Black Doves, has just returned to London after 7 years' absence. He, too, is about to be drawn into the complex web of crime, political conspiracy, and vengeance that will turn both his and Helen's lives upside down. Let's listen to a clip from Black Doves. In this scene, Knightly's Helen and Wishaw's Sam are meeting up for the first time in 7 years. As they sit in his car, she describes her decade of sham marriage to the British Defence Minister, who is on track to possibly become the next British Prime Minister.
I kept meaning to leave, put an end to it, but then I had the kids and it was just never the right time. Then Wallace gets his first cabinet position. They put my rates up. They're doing well in the polls, snap election, suddenly I'm married to the Defence Secretary. Everyone knows. In the next reshuffle, he's going to get something bigger, and then...
Number 10?
PM's wife.
Helen Webb, the spy at the heart of government.
All right, Steve, I know you love a cozy British spy mystery from some of your endorsements in the past. How did Black Dove strike you?
Oh, dear. I was shocked to discover I read no reviews before I watched about 3 hours of this. And my first note in my Word document was, this is an impossibly bad TV show. It has a Chat GPT quality script, just screamingly stupid, beat by beat. I was amazed to discover that the critical consensus is it's terrific, or at least terrific fun. I had no fun. It's this mashup of the Americans and slow horses. It feels like it fits a market space in the gap in the market between seasons of slow horses. It has that, if you liked, X, you'll like Y. It's problematic from the jump. First of all, the plot is just absurd. Over and over and over again, lazy, half-assed writing just seems to think it'll carry over if you ignore the gaping holes in every single piece of it. It's just weird. I get that it doesn't have to be believable. It doesn't have to have any verisimilitude for it to be good. But at least it needs pizzazz, cleverness, and it needs to work. The work isn't getting it right as in terms of true to real life spying. That's ridiculous. It's a genre piece. It's doing the work to make sure my disbelief is suspended. And I just can't believe anyone watched this without noticing, for example, she takes a phone call from her kid while she's trying to remain hidden from brutal assassins that have broken in downstairs, and doesn't just hang up the freaking phone, and instead allows an audible phone call to continue. And then just a little thing, like at this point, I was driven so mad. I was nitpicking everything. Then the two assassins who we're supposed to believe are highly trained, killers, enter the apartment, and they proceed through it side by side. They don't, the two of them don't go into any kind of formation in order to ensure that, for example, if the person they're hunting were to leap out, she could attack them both simultaneously. I mean, it's just, everything about it is so, I can't think of a better word. It's so fucking lazy. I mean, Ben Wishaw's, we get a flashback to his first job as a trigger man, right? And after doing it, he sits in his car outside the Chinese restaurant and just sort of considers, the moral implications and spiritual implications of taking another human life, presumably. I mean, he's sitting there silently. And nobody's running out of the restaurant or running into the restaurant. There's no sound of a siren in the background. He's in no hurry to go away. He's covered in blood. Everyone just went back to their spicy noodles. And I'm like, really? Was anyone able to like flow along with this? It's so fucking dumb. The whole premise of the show is nonsensical. This guy, when she marries him, is exceedingly low level. So why did they bother emplacing a spy as his wife, right? Like, how could they know that that amount of work, that deep cover, is going to pay off in 10 years when he becomes the defense secretary of the United Kingdom? I mean, that's nutso to begin with. And then they sort of wave their hand lazily at the idea that she stayed with him and had twin kids. And now it's like, wait, what exactly? I mean, it's just so silly. She is in this marriage in some real way, or isn't in the marriage? Is she totally cynical and sociopathic and detached, and this information is so valuable? And how is she being compensated for this exactly? It's become her actual life. None of this is explained. It's just the weirdest facsimile of peak TV. It is just a terrible, terrible television show.
Screamingly stupid. Julia, yes or no?
Resounding agreement with Steve. I'm so bummed that you didn't like it, because I was looking forward to having a big fight about it. But I also was shocked to read the reviews after I watched this and have everyone be like, what an incredible spy show. Your Christmas break is spoken for. So beautiful. The praise seems to be that it explores in some real way the emotional lives of the spies, because Ben Whishaw is like moping about his ex, and Keira seems to have, I don't know, some sadness about her affair and some misgivings about her double life. But I honestly thought this show made the diplomat seem like the Americans. Like just nothing in it is plausible. And again, I have the exact same critique as you, Steve, which means I'll make this brief and turn it over to Dana in case she liked it. But it is not that any spy show is fundamentally plausible, but Slow Horses, The Americans, The Diplomat, they all do this grounding work to put on this patina of plausible realism. They do this work to sort of be like, oh, you're getting a sense of how it might really go. This feels like how it would go if I invented a spy show doing no research when I was 11. Yeah, there's exactly. A secret group, and they none of it feels real. So then the fact that you've got these lauded actors, and I'm a huge Ben Whishaw fan, and I will say that Keira Knightly is actually one of those actors that I never lose myself. I'm always like, it's Keira Knightly doing her Keira Knightly thing, and her, sometimes in costume or when she's in a lighter role, I like it better. But and that's a me problem, not a Keira Knightly problem. But she's just one of those actors that I can never unsee in a role. But these two thespian twigs who are supposedly power killers, I just, none of it works. Dana, did you love it?
I mean, I wish I loved it so that we could have an interesting fight about that. But I will say that I didn't hate it with the bitter spite that Steve does. And I watched 4.5 episodes of it. So now that I'm an hour and a half from the end, I'll probably finish it. At least it's one of those mercifully short British shows. I think 6 episodes is the perfect length for this kind of show. And Julia, I have a couple things to say to your response. For one thing, I don't think your Keira Knightly problem is a you problem, because I have always felt the exact same about Keira Knightly. I just don't think she's an interesting screen presence, and it doesn't help that her character here makes no sense. Strangely to me, the Ben Whishaw stories worked better. I mean, part of it is just Ben Whishaw really is amazingly fun to watch. He's the anti-Keira in that sense. There's always 10 countercurrents going on in his face reacting to anything. And while the idea of him as some sort of contract killer is inherently absurd, Let's take The Americans as an example, Julia, which obviously is a strong counterexample because it's a very smart show, but its world, however consistently established within the world of The Americans, is also absurd. The idea that Carrie Russell is, taking down Russian bad guys with her bare fists and things like that. Like the idea that it's unrealistic that these two good-looking, posh people would be, in fact, secret killers and spies, I would be willing to accept. But yeah, it's more that the entire crime plot and the motivations, especially of Keira Knightley's character, don't make any sense at all. The show that this made me think of in terms of, Steve, lazy spy procedural things on streaming channels was Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Remember how much you and I both hated that show? I think Mr. and Mrs. Smith is actually more reprehensible and worse than this show. But it was similar in its, in its just invention by fiat of this secret community of spies that for some reason can run around in broad daylight with guns and no one ever notices them or asks any questions. Everybody in this show, Black Doves, is constantly revealing what the Black Doves are. It's like you spend 5 minutes with someone in a pub and you're saying like, actually, I got to tell you, I'm a spy, secret organization, Black Doves, Chinese ambassador. They just lay it all out.
Well, wait, that's such an insult to Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Nah, that show sucked.
That show had this like high concept that it committed to, and it tonally recognized that it was in this absurd Dada realm, which might or might not have worked for you. I think it worked medium for me and not at all. But this one, I think because each of them is doing a different thing tonally, the Dada premise doesn't quite fly.
I mean, I honestly mean it when I say there was a moment when I thought the big reveal of the show is that someone just sat down in front of their MacBook Air and typed in ChatGPT, write a 6-part British spy thriller, and just sat back and let it go. I'm really only half kidding. I think it's that bad. For example, can you summarize quickly who exactly the murdered person we're supposed to care about is? There's a Chinese ambassador, an ex-lover, and then a kidnapped daughter of the Chinese ambassador. These things are run together so incoherently. I never felt the slightest bit of focus between these preposterous action set pieces as to where it was going and what we were rooting for her to take revenge on the murdered lover, for this like sort of hazy waved at plot about the Chinese ambassador that I can't possibly follow. But one of my favorite screamingly dumb moments in the whole thing is, here she is, she's desperately trying to hide from her husband, of course, and everybody who knows her that she really is a plant. Nonetheless, she goes to the pub where the memorial for her slain lover is happening, which her husband for some reason is going to, even though this guy was a low-level diplomat, and it's being thrown in a pub. So it's in a public place, which it has to be in order for the preposterous setup. And she goes in she's not disguised really. She's just wearing sort of a fedora slightly pulled down over her face. To be seen in the pub by her husband would be disastrous. Like, what the fuck are you doing there? But secondly, she just wanders over and sticks another flower that she's brought with her into the bouquet of flowers up front. And miraculously, it matches the other flowers in the bouquet. Isn't that convenient? And then later we see that there's a little bug planted in the iris of the flower. And then she twiddles some knobs back at some remote location so that apparently this tiny little bug is capable of being directional. And she's able to find, with its directionality in this crowded, burbling pub, her husband having a conversation in this memorial service, a highly sensitive conversation about the Chinese ambassador that would blow up global relations if anyone heard it. But of course, he has to simultaneously raise his voice in order to be heard over the burble and lower it to make sure he's not overheard by someone else. Everything about it is wrong.
Steve, can I tell you my conclusion from this conversation? I think that you should head a secret international spy organization because you really have a lot of good management tips.
Yeah, and you have a lot of like tactical suggestions and advice about like assassination formations and
throw out Sarah Lancashire, put Steve in charge of the Black Doves, and maybe we'll have a working organization. All right. Well, despite our mockery, this show has been very successful on Netflix. Lots of people seem to be loving it, including lots of TV critics. So if you're intrigued, and honestly, if you like Ben Whishaw, he's the guy who's carrying me through, check out Black Doves on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know that you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve recently announced rate cuts, and there could be more rate cuts this year and in 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest you earn with your cash. So if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade bonds, check out Public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up, and once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments even as rates decline. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/culture. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info.
It's always fun to dive into the latest rumors like who's dating who will be on the next season of our favorite show. Well, here's one rumor to squash the idea that Discover isn't widely accepted. The truth is, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. That means it's accepted basically anywhere across the country. Don't pay attention to every rumor out there. But remember, it does pay to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
Last Wednesday, December 5th, the CEO of the insurance giant UnitedHealthcare, Brian Thompson, was gunned down in Midtown Manhattan. The shooter fled the scene on a bicycle, discarded his backpack in Central Park, and for 6 days was the subject of a manhunt by the NYPD. Earlier this week, the suspect, a young man named Luigi Mangione, was arrested at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and is now in custody. There's a lot that's still not known about Mangione and about the details of this murder, but this is not a true crime podcast, and we're not here to discuss the case itself as much as the social media reaction to the shooting. Before Mangione's account was taken down from X shortly after the suspect was arrested, it had rapidly gained about 100,000 new followers. A Facebook post about the shooting quickly garnered something like 36,000 laughing emojis. In just a few minutes of scrolling Blue Sky for posts about the shooter yesterday, I saw him referred to as, quote, the thirst trap assassin, unquote, and in capital letters as if it were a superhero name or a vigilante, the claims adjuster. If you spent any time on social media platforms over the past week, you probably saw this phenomenon too. People responding sardonically, even jubilantly, to the news that some Robin Hood out there had finally given a representative of America's ghoulishly greedy insurance industry what was coming to them. Julia, there's been a lot of response and discourse about the discourse about this shooting, even before the shooter's name and identity came out. And so we decided, actually, at the last minute to pivot to this as a subject because I think it is a culture question. It's not just a current event that a man was shot in the streets of Manhattan. It really is a sort of social phenomenon that there's this strange well of, I don't want to call it support. I don't know exactly what the word would be, but a kind of goodwill or a defense of the shooter. And then, of course, there's been a wave of backlash to that kind of discourse, decrying the callousness and cruelty of cheering on a murderer in the public square.
Yeah, I mean, I've been puzzling through this, reading about the story over the last week and in anticipation of our segment. And I think part of what is so arresting and puzzling about both the initial response and the vociferous response to the response, I think the key to understanding it is that this news story is actually quite new. Like what's happened here is unusual on a ton of fronts. It is unusual for America's gun violence problem to manifest as a CEO being gunned down in the streets. It is unusual for the alleged shooter to be a privileged Ivy Leaguer. It is unusual for there to be, words etched on bullet casings and for a suspect to get away for a stretch of time and for the manhunt to stretch on. Typically, the shooters in these situations are either shot dead on the scene or immediately apprehended. So the kind of suspense is unusual. It's the Monopoly money found in the backpack. I mean, the whole thing feels more out of a movie than out of real life. And so I think that's part of what maybe creates an environment where there's like this anarchic, gleeful reaction to it in some quarters of the internet, because it all feels slightly divorced from reality as we've known it, even though, of course, it's terribly real for this human guy and his family and his kids and this man who was murdered in broad daylight on the streets of Manhattan, which is obviously not a thing anyone should root for. And I think layered over that, of course, is the political and moral failings of the insurance industry, which are incredibly real and affect tons of families and people. And so I think we just don't have like rhythms or routines for how all those things are supposed to intersect. And that's part of why we're getting this electrified response.
Yeah. Steve, it seems like there's a basic ethical principle at work here, or a kind of ethical dilemma at the heart of the question. What is the meaning? What's the moral and ethical meaning of, for example, posting jokes about the death of a CEO and laughing at those jokes virtually online? I mean, it's not a private conversation, right? It's starting a public conversation that has a kind of vigilante element, but is also being spoken by someone in a position of zero power, right? Whose own lives and bodies and the lives and bodies of their families have felt imperiled, possibly their whole lives, by choices that the insurance industry has made about how to do their business. And I just don't know how I feel about the moral meaning of all of that. Like, I personally would never post a joke like that, but in part it might be because I would be afraid of the repercussions or the social shaming. And I certainly laughed at some of them.
Going to the tamest comment section, presumably in the world, I looked at some comments on op-ed or something on the New York Times, right? And they all basically start with a version of, I don't condone, violence or political violence or murder, but, right? So to me, it's all in that but, and what that but leads to. I mean, I think we're all feeling the nature of that but in one way or another. And the first thing that it did is it reminded me of this passage in Orwell about a phrase. He took W.H. Auden to task for a phrase he'd used in a poem about the Spanish Civil War called "the necessary murder." Orwell says it could only be written by a person to whom murder is at most a word. Personally, I would not speak so lightly of murder. It so happens that I've seen the bodies of a number of murdered men. I don't mean killed in battle. I mean murdered. Therefore, I have some conception of what murder means. The terror, the hatred, the howling relatives, the postmortems, the blood, the smells. To me, murder is something to be avoided. So it is to any ordinary person. The Hitlers and the Stalins find murder necessary, but they don't advertise their callousness, and they don't speak of it as murder. It's liquidation, elimination, or some other soothing phrase. Mr. Auden's brand of amoralism is only possible if you're the kind of person who is always somewhere else when the trigger is pulled. So the first thing that occurred to me was, of course, this just welling up of rage against the healthcare industry is entirely motivated. And I thought, Julia, that's brilliant. It's new. It's news that's actually news because it has no manufactured element to it. It actually is a grassroots, ground up, welling up of feeling that's highly spontaneous. It is not partisan. It's not red and blue. It breaks completely through a paradigm of epistemological collapse, right? A thing happened. People are responding to the thing. They are not filtering their feelings through a partisan or red or blue affiliation. It's not mediated in any way. No one is telling anyone how to feel on Fox or MSNBC or otherwise. And I say this totally observationally and not as a expression of approval. He is, in that sense, a genuine folk hero. And I think while keeping in mind that murder is murder, and I think he himself expressed, as if the reports are correct, that, he knew what he had done and what it meant. But if he's a Robin Hood, it's not because he's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. It's because he's attempting, or I think he's being perceived as attempting to strike a blow against the maldistribution of fear and precarity in American society. And I think it's very hard to balance the I don't condone, but that but is being asked to do an enormous amount of work. To keep in mind that a murder like that is in isolation a totally vile act, but in context in American society in 2024, in which, for example, the stock price of UnitedHealthcare in 2010 was $33 a share, and because of its ability to deny claims and therefore allow purportedly enormous numbers of people to die unnecessary deaths or experience enormous amounts of unnecessary pain, the stock price is now $600 a share. So, it's $600 a share, not because they are now delivering 20 times better healthcare to the American people. It's because in the cause of shareholder value, lives have been actually sacrificed. So somehow one has to carve out an ethical worldview that accounts both for the total unacceptability of political murder and what a slippery slope that is, given what we're in for over the next 4 years, but balanced against other forms of needless death that have inspired this backlash.
I mean, I think you've put your finger on the fact that there's sort of two threads of interpretation. There's like the factual, actual act of murder. And then there's the sort of symbolic act and the remove that everyone has posting from their own phone or car or bedroom or bathroom or wherever. They're not there on the street watching a man's life taken from him in one shock act of vigilante violence. And so maybe it's easier to shoot off a joke or treat it as a symbolic fact rather than an actual act of violence. And then, of course, the various slow leeching violences of the American healthcare system on the people subject to it are harder to put your finger on, right? They're in slow motion and they're less dramatic and they're not illegal. So I think that's part of what makes it hard to suss out.
Yeah, it seems like the groundswell of response, of highly emotional response to this killing has so much to do with the moment we're in. And I wondered when reading about this, whether if Trump had not won, right, if Trump had not won last month and we were looking at a different 4 years to come, if this response might have been more muted. I mean, people would hate their healthcare just as much as they do with Trump having been elected. But the sense of hopelessness and of a kind of net closing in and of really, truly just 5 or 6 powerful male billionaires now controlling everything, I think that may have intensified the sense that this felt to a lot of people like an act of revolution, right? A public execution of a powerful, moneyed individual who holds a great deal of power over the lives of millions of people that he doesn't know, right? Or hundreds of thousands. I don't know how many people have UHC healthcare. It feels like the French Revolution, right? Like the king being beheaded or something like that. And that naturally kind of causes this groundswell of popular feeling. But of course, no one, including those who want revolution, would say that the way to get there is by just extrajudicial killings on the street. That's not justice, right? I mean, the same as if people who were against Trump, very strongly against Trump, would still not want him to have been, I speaking for myself, would not want him to have been killed in that attempt on his life earlier this year, right? Because it wouldn't be justice. It would just be street violence, which would lead to more street violence. So even though most people who are moral actors and thinkers could be marched through that set of rationalizations to get to the point of saying, yes, we do not want a world of extrajudicial killing by whoever feels wronged by any other individual on the street. We can't get away from the fact that at this very fraught moment in American history, this very symbolic killing has meant a lot to a lot of people, and what they have burst out saying may not be the most defensible thing that one could post online or the wisest thing to post online. But that groundswell does have a kind of emotional and populist importance. It means something. And that's why I'm glad we decided to talk about it.
Audible's best of 2024 picks are here. Discover the year's top audiobooks, podcasts, and originals in all your favorite genres. From memoirs and sci-fi to mysteries and thrillers, from romance and well-being to fiction, Audible's carefully curated list in every category is the best way to hear 2024's best of the year in audio entertainment, like the star-studded production of George Orwell's 1984, which both honors and reinvigorates the terrifying classic. It's one of the best original dramatizations out there. Or romance that hits the spot like Emily Henry's Funny Story, heartfelt memoirs like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's Lovely One. Listen to the year's best fiction like The Women by Kristen Hanna and Percival Everett's brilliantly subversive James. Audible. There's more to imagine when you listen. Go to audible.com/culture and discover all the year's best waiting for you.
Stephen, it's the moment in our show when we do the business. What have you got for us this week?
Okay, this week we have two business items. The first is that I'm going to throw out a last call for our annual call-in show. This is as fun an annual item as our summer strut. You guys call in, you leave voice memos, send us emails, and we respond to them. So you can call in at the number is 260-337-8260. You can send us a text email, that's fine, but we really like hearing your voice. I think it enhances the show considerably. You can also embed, I'm told, a voice memo in an email. Go figure. Any one of those is fine. So shoot us a question at 260-337-8260.
Yeah, this show is always one of our most fun of the year. This is the show where you guys reduce me to tears describing my childhood favorite book about a fictional mouse architect, which then later, thanks to our listeners, was like brought back into the world. So all kinds of things can happen out of this show. Sorry, that book is Nita House called Miss Mouse. Great gift for younglings in your life. But here's just one great question we've gotten so far. The superhero universe is a cosmic joke played on us earthlings. Bloated, silly, overwrought. But let's pretend you're the creative in charge when the studio comes to you and you get to create the superhero universe of your dreams. Who would the superheroes be? What fights would be fought? How would they be fought? Would there be winners and losers? I love that one. It's a wild exercise. I'm already cogitating upon my potential answer. So please send us the goofy, the fun, the serious. Someone else also asked us, what's your relationship to pottery? Which, get ready, I'm just going to have a 45-minute disquisition on that subject. So if you don't want that, you should send in questions so that I'll talk about something besides pottery.
We have to do that question now, Julia, because that is an entirely new side emerging. I don't think I've ever once heard a single thought from you about pottery in our 16 years of recording show together. Yeah,
this is
pro or con. I don't even know.
This is where we get to discover new nooks and crannies of each other, even after our many, many years in conversation. So help us excavate and explore. Please send in great questions. This is always a super fun show.
Hear, hear. And then, of course, every week our business item includes a heads up about our Slate Plus segment, Slat Plus. This week, we are talking about celebrity lookalike contests. There was a high-profile one for Timothée Chalamet. Recently, there was one for Luigi Mangione. They seem to be something of a trend. Why is that, and how do we feel about them? If you're not a Slate Plus member, I'm very upset with you, and you can rectify that. You can sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Members get ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment we just mentioned. You'll also get to hear members-only programming on other Slate shows like Slow Burn and Political Gabfest, and members get unlimited access to all the great writing on slate.com. You will never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. I should also mention that you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. I really mean it. I ad-lib this every time because I'm sincere. These are lifeblood for the Slate organization and for our podcast. These memberships keep the lights on. They're really important for us and for Slate. So please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Again, that's slate.com/cultureplus. Or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, back to the show.
Well, it's the moment in our show where we endorse the cultural object or experience that most changed our life this week. Steve, what have you got?
I want to begin by saying, Julia, you weren't on the show last week. I'm now 250 pages into Bleak House. And what I want to do is just endorse it on every subsequent show that we do. Cradle to grave. That book, man, as expected, slotting in right next to Middlemarch. And can't never decide quite whether Anna Karenina or War and Peace is my favorite of those two. But let's just say it's slotting in next to all of those. Just amazing. And I'll revisit it in a couple of weeks when I'm done, I'm sure. In the meantime, Richard Thompson, famously the songwriter, in fact, when he, never got quite the recognition he deserved or hasn't, still going as a songwriter. I mean, people venerate him, don't get me wrong, but one would like to hear his name more frequently in the company of, I don't know, Dylan and Neil Young maybe, or Joni Mitchell. I mean, is he in that league? I don't know, but he's close enough that hear more about Richard Thompson. And the songwriter label has just followed him around so much so that when he finally went on Colbert said, what does that even mean, songwriter? Like, is someone a plumber's plumber? And Richard Thompson was very amused by that. But anyway, he has an old song that he did when he was in a duo with his ex-wife, Linda Thompson, a song called Down Where the Drunkards Roll, which is just an insanely beautiful song and one of his best. And I found just the most wonderful cover of it on YouTube. Rufus Wainwright, who I hope we all appropriately adore, does a duet version of it with his father, Loudon Wainwright, the folk eminence, who's still going strong. And in fact, Loudon has covered it quite a bit solo. Like, he plays it live and always introduces it as a song that he just smites his own conscience for not having written. He just says, damn you, Richard Thompson. It's just such a perfect song. But watching father and son duo, Loudon Wainwright and Rufus Wainwright, do it together and harmonizing beautiful on that particular song is really powerful. We'll link to a YouTube video of them doing it live. Down Where the Drunkards Roll by the songwriter Richard Thompson, by Loudon and Rufus Wainwright.
That sounds so good. I love the Wainwright family and what I know of Richard and Linda Thompson as well. So that's totally going on the to listen list. Thank you. Julia, what about you?
All right. I have an endorsement that I fear Dana's going to tell me she already endorsed, but I have just discovered it myself, and maybe you haven't, and if not, it seems extremely up Dana's alley. Are either of you aware of Tree.fm?
No.
Okay. Tree.fm is a website you can go to that will play you the ambient sounds of forests all over the world. And then if you get sick of one forest, you can click a button that says next forest, please. And then you get a different forest. And sometimes the forests have waterfalls, and sometimes they have burbling songbirds, and sometimes they have the susurration of tree leaves. Anyway, if you want some ambient peace, especially having just spent 10 days in New York City, during which time I got to see you delightful people, but also during which time I was like, how do people live here with no trees? It's crazy. You have to put the trees in little tree zoos. It's just so sad. Anyway, Tree.fm. It's fabulous.
I have one question about Tree.fm, which I will definitely check out. Is it live cams? Are you seeing the forest at this very moment in time?
It's audio. It's audio.
So you don't see anything, but is it live audio? Do you have any idea?
I don't think it is. I think it is taped, but I will check.
I'm curious just because, and I know I've endorsed this on the show before, like it would take a lot to tear me away from my explore.org live cams of different places in nature, especially my beloved Mississippi River Flyway Cam, which is this incredible bird sanctuary in, I think, Nebraska or someplace. It's basically sort of my window that I look out while working, but maybe I could have an audio window as well of some.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's live because they have sort of time delimited things. Like I just clicked next forest, please, and got a 5 minute and 57 second clip. So I think they must be selected.
That still sounds like absolutely my kind of thing. So thanks so much, Julia. Both of you have endorsements that I'm going to look into. All right. And I hope the same for my endorsement for the two of you. I'm reading this great book. Actually, I'm listening to this great book right now called The Year of Lear by James Shapiro. I came across it because it was free on Audible. You know how sometimes they have some sort of free offerings at the top of the page? I don't know how they decide to cycle things in and out, but once in a while, if you have a subscription, you just get offered some freebies. And because this was about Shakespeare and it was by a professor at Columbia, seemed solid, ended up downloading it. And it's fantastic. This is such a great book, The Year of Lear. It's about the year of 1606, which is the year in which Shakespeare wrote King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra. And it's also early. It was just a significant year in English history. There were 2 plagues that swept London that year. It was very early in the reign of King James. So, you know, the post-Elizabethan era, the beginning of the Jacobean era in England, total political turmoil between England and Scotland, like fascinating background in that way. And this is just exactly the kind of literary history I love to read. And that's very hard to find. That is both teaches you a lot about that time and contextualizes the work and puts it in history, but it's also really good criticism. Like early on in the book, there's a long disquisition that Shapiro writes on the word nothing in King Lear and the significance of the word nothing. And it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful bit of literary criticism. That was what sold me on the book. So I'm about halfway through and I'm listening very carefully, like rewinding all the time to get more details. This guy is a great writer. I want to read his other books on Shakespeare now, one of which is called Contested Will. But Year of Lear, absolutely great survey of that time in Shakespeare's life.
Oh man, yes, please. I cannot wait to read this.
Yeah, scribble down that title, Steve. It's very you. All right, well, we've done it. We've reached the end of another Slate Culture Gabfest. You'll find links to some of the things that we talked about today on our show page, slate.com/culturefest. You can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our producer is Jared Downing, our production assistant is Kat Hong, and the composer of our theme music is Nicholas Bertel. For Steve Metcalf and Julia Turner, I'm Dana Stevens saying thanks so much for being a listener, and we'll talk again next week.
Audible's best of 2024 picks are here. Discover the year's top audiobooks, podcasts, and originals in all your favorite genres. From memoirs and sci-fi to mysteries and thrillers, from romance and well-being to fiction, Audible's carefully curated list in every category is the best way to hear 2024's best of the year in audio entertainment, like the star-studded production of George Orwell's 1984, which both honors and reinvigorates the terrifying classic. It's one of the best original dramatizations out there. Or romance that hits the spot like Emily Henry's Funny Story, heartfelt memoirs like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's Lovely One. Listen to the year's best fiction like The Women by Kristen Hanna and Percival Everett's brilliantly subversive James. Audible. There's more to imagine when you listen. Go to audible.com/culture and discover all the year's best waiting for you.